There's a garden 2 counties over that I think about almost every week. An Amish family, 4 generations on the same plot of land pulling vegetables out of soil that hasn't seen a bag of synthetic fertilizer in over 100 years. I drove past it the first time and didn't understand what I was looking at. Everything was too green, too tall, too alive. The kind of garden that makes you stop the car and stare through the fence like a child at a candy shop window. I'd been gardening for 11 years at that point, 11 years of amended beds and drip lines and a composting setup that cost me more than my first car. And standing there on the shoulder of a dirt road, I felt like a complete fool. I went home and looked at my beds, the sandy, pale soil I'd been fighting since we moved here, the bolted lettuce, the tomatoes with their sad little blossom end rot, and I made a decision. I was going to stop listening to the advice I'd been given and start watching what these families had been doing quietly, generation after generation, without a single YouTube video, without a single bag of NPK blend, and without a single piece of advice from anyone who didn't actually grow food for survival. What I found over the next 3 years changed everything, not just how I garden, how I think about soil, how I think about seeds, how I think about water and weeds, and the whole relationship between a person and a piece of land. These aren't tricks in the flashy sense of the word. They're principles that got banned from mainstream gardening culture not because they didn't work, but because you can't sell them. You can't put them in a bottle. And now, soil scientists and agronomists at actual universities are publishing papers confirming what these communities have been practicing for centuries. I'm going to walk you through 4 of them, and I want to start with the one that nearly made me abandon gardening entirely before I understood what was actually going on underground. The first thing you need to know is that Amish families in the Lancaster County of Pennsylvania have been building soil in a way that is fundamentally different from what every gardening book I ever read told me to do. And the difference isn't about adding more, it's about timing and what you're feeding. Most of us compost the same way. Pile it up, turn it, wait, spread it in spring. I did this for years. My compost was fine. It smelled earthy, it looked dark, and it did basically nothing. I mean, it helped, a little, but the plants never exploded the way I expected. The reason, I eventually understood, is that finished compost, the kind that's fully broken down, fully stable, crumbly and brown, is nearly inert by the time it hits your soil. The microbial activity that made it valuable is over. You're spreading the aftermath of a party that already happened. What Amish gardeners do instead is something called pre-composting incorporation. And that's a term I'm making up to describe what I watch them do, because there isn't a good mainstream name for it. In the fall, after the last harvest, they dig raw, half-finished organic material directly into the top 8 to 12 inches of the bed. Not finished compost, not aged manure, raw, straw, kitchen scraps, half-rotted vegetable debris, even fresh manure from the barn, layered and buried right into the planting zone, then left alone for the entire winter. What happens underground over those 4 to 6 months is not decomposition, it's transformation. The microbial population in the soil explodes. Fungal networks spread through the debris, worm populations multiply. And by spring, that raw material has become something finished compost can never be, a living, actively feeding substrate that's in peak biological activity exactly when your seedlings need it. Scientists now call this in situ composting, and studies out of Cornell and Wageningen University have confirmed what these farmers already knew. The microbial biomass in fall-incorporated beds is 3 to 5 times higher in spring than in beds amended with finished compost. 3 to 5 times. I spent a decade spreading finished compost and wondering why my soil never seemed to wake up. It was because I was arriving to the party the morning after, sweeping up cups. The practical version of this is almost insultingly simple. In October, or whenever your last crops finish, you dig a trench 8 inches deep across each bed. You fill it with whatever raw organic material you have, kitchen scraps, straw, the spent plants themselves if they're disease-free, shredded leaves, coffee grounds, vegetable peels, anything that was once alive. You cover it back over with the soil you removed, walk away, and do not touch it until March. That's it. No turning, no layering, no carbon to nitrogen ratios, no brown to green calculations. Just bury it and let the soil do what soil has been doing for 400 million years. If you have nothing else to change in your garden this year, change this. The second thing I got profoundly wrong was seeds. I want to confess something here that I find embarrassing. For 8 of my 11 gardening years, I bought new seeds every single spring. Fresh packets from the same 3 catalog companies, rotated the varieties occasionally, wondered why certain things never did well in my specific soil and climate. The Amish families I observed do not buy seeds. Or rather, they buy seeds once, maybe twice in a generation, when they're introducing a new crop or recovering from a loss. Otherwise, every seed they plant came from their own garden, saved by hand, stored in paper envelopes in a cool, dry drawer, and selected over years, sometimes decades, for the specific conditions of their specific land. The science behind this is called landrace development, and it is one of the most powerful forces in agriculture that modern gardening has almost completely abandoned. When you save seeds from the plants that performed best in your garden, the ones that resisted your particular fungal pressure, that set fruit in your particular temperature window, that thrived in your specific soil pH, and you replant those seeds year after year, the variety begins to adapt. It develops what plant geneticists call local adaptation. After 5 to 7 years of selection, a saved tomato variety will outperform a commercial variety in your specific garden by a margin that is not subtle. It's not 10% better, it's the difference between a plant that's fighting your conditions and one that's evolved for them. The practical version starts with the easiest crops: dry beans, tomatoes, peppers, and squash. Let 1 or 2 of your best performing specimens go fully to seed, meaning you don't harvest them for eating. You let them ripen completely until the seeds inside are mature. For tomatoes, let the fruit go soft and starting to ferment on the vine. For beans, let the pod go completely dry and papery. Then extract the seeds, rinse them if needed. Dry them on a paper towel for 2 weeks until they snap rather than bend when you fold them, and store them in a labeled envelope in a drawer away from heat. Year 1, you won't notice much. Year 3, you'll start to see something shift. Year 7, you'll be that gardener who gives seeds away to neighbors and watches them struggle to get the same results you do, because the seed has become as specific to your garden as your soil is to your land. The investment is zero, the patience required is high, but there is no product you can buy that replicates what 5 years of seed saving builds. Now, pest and weed control. This is the area where I think the gap between mainstream gardening and traditional Amish practice is the widest and the most counterintuitive, because the approach is not to control pests and weeds, it's to make control unnecessary. Let me explain what I mean. Most of us treat pest and weed pressure as a problem to be solved, something to spray, pull, trap, or smother. And every spring, we face the same problems again, roughly at the same intensity, and we solve them again with the same effort. It's a maintenance cycle, not a solution. Amish gardens, particularly the older established ones, don't look like they have pest and weed management programs. They have companion planting systems so densely layered that there's almost no bare soil and almost no monoculture anywhere in the bed. This is not accidental. It's a design principle that took me a long time to really see, because it doesn't look like gardening. It looks like controlled chaos. The specific practice is polyculture stacking, planting 3 to 5 species together in a single bed in a spatial arrangement that serves multiple functions at once. The classic example is the 3 sisters: corn, beans, and squash grown in the same hill. The corn provides structure for the beans. The beans fix nitrogen into the soil. The squash covers the ground, suppressing weeds with its leaves and retaining moisture with its shade. But the Amish beds I saw weren't running the 3 sisters. They were running 8 or 9 sisters. Dill and nasturtium scattered through the beds as pest deterrents. Borage near tomatoes for pollinator attraction and pest confusion. Marigolds, but specifically French marigolds, Tagetes patula, planted at the border of every single bed because their roots release a compound called alpha-terthianol that's toxic to nematodes and suppresses weed seed germination within a radius of about 12 inches. University research, specifically work done at the Rodale Institute and at the University of Massachusetts, has confirmed that polyculture beds with 5 or more species show a 40 to 60% reduction in aphid pressure compared to monoculture beds without any intervention. The mechanism is called associational resistance. Pests that specialize in one crop can't find enough of it in a dense polyculture to establish a colony. The garden becomes ecologically confusing for pests in a way that a neat row of a single vegetable never can be. For weeds, dense canopy cover from a layered polyculture reduces light at the soil surface by up to 80%, which suppresses the germination of most annual weed seeds entirely. The soil doesn't stop producing weeds, the system stops giving them the light they need to emerge. The stripped-down beginner version of this is stop planting in neat rows with bare soil between them. Plant in blocks. Interplant flowers among vegetables. Let the canopy close. Put a border of French marigolds around anything you care about. You don't need to understand the full ecology on day one. The system will start doing its job even if you're only partially implementing it. Water management is where I saw the biggest gap between what I was taught and what these communities actually do. I grew up believing that consistent watering, regular intervals, measured amounts, drip irrigation for efficiency was the gold standard. And in terms of keeping plants alive, it is. But keeping plants alive is not the same as building the relationship between a plant and the water table beneath it. Traditional Amish water management, particularly in communities in Ohio and Indiana that I had the opportunity to observe over 2 growing seasons, is built around a principle called deep, infrequent watering, combined with soil structure cultivation. They water hard and they water rarely. Not a trickle every day, a deep soaking once a week or once every 10 days in non-extreme heat, directed at the base of the plant and allowed to penetrate 18 to 24 inches. The reasoning is root architecture. A plant that receives shallow, frequent water develops a shallow root system that stays near the surface where the water is. That root system is fragile, drought-sensitive, and dependent on the gardener showing up with a hose every other day. A plant that receives deep, infrequent water is forced to send roots down toward the moisture reservoir below the surface. Those roots eventually reach stable subsoil moisture, moisture that doesn't evaporate, moisture that doesn't fluctuate with a hot afternoon. The plant becomes partly self-sufficient. Soil scientists call this hydraulic lift, the process by which deep-rooted plants actually bring water up from lower soil layers at night and release it near the surface, where shallow-rooted neighbors can access it. A garden built on deep, infrequent watering over 2 to 3 seasons begins to develop a water cycle that is partially independent of rainfall. I know that sounds like too much to promise, but the data on root depth versus watering frequency is not ambiguous. Plants watered daily at 1 inch develop root systems that are mostly confined to the top 6 inches of soil. Plants watered weekly at 3 to 4 inches develop root systems that reach 18 to 30 inches. That root depth is the difference between a plant that wilts the moment you miss a day and a plant that shrugs through a 2-week dry spell. The practical application is harder than it sounds because it requires you to tolerate a few days of mild wilt stress in your plants while their roots are learning where to go. The first 2 weeks of switching to deep, infrequent watering are uncomfortable to watch. The plants look like they want water even when they don't need it. This is normal. It's the root system recalibrating. After 6 to 8 weeks, you'll notice your plants standing differently. More upright in the afternoon heat, less droopy in the evening, less needy overall. They're not performing for you anymore. They're actually rooted. A note on expectations. I want to be honest with you about something that these 4 techniques have in common. None of them work in one season. Soil biology takes time. Seed adaptation takes years. Pest ecology builds across growing cycles. Root architecture develops over weeks, not days. If you come to these methods looking for a transformation that shows up in your June harvest, you're going to be disappointed, and you're going to conclude that the old ways don't work. They do work. They work on a timeline that modern gardening culture is not comfortable with, and that is exactly why they got replaced by inputs you can buy and see results from in 2 weeks. The Amish families whose gardens I was watching didn't start those gardens, they inherited them. The soil I was admiring through a fence had been tended the same way for 100 years. That's not a discouragement. It's the most hopeful thing I can tell you, because it means that every choice you make this season is not just for this season. It's for the gardener who tends this land in 30 years. And the fact that you're even asking these questions means that gardener might be you. If you want to go deeper into any of these 4 methods, particularly the fall incorporation timing and the polyculture spacing ratios, which are harder to explain in the time we have here, there's a full guide linked below this video. And if you're watching on a TV, you can find it by searching the title of this video and looking for the resource link in the description. Everything in that guide is free. There's nothing to buy. I'm not selling a seed kit or a compost system or a watering schedule. I'm just trying to pass on what I spent 3 years watching and another 3 years testing so that you don't have to start as far back as I did. Come find me in the comments and tell me which of these 4 you're trying first. I read every one and I want to know what your soil looks like, what you're starting with, what you've tried, what's frustrated you. Because I guarantee you're not failing. Whatever story you've told yourself about your garden this year, I promise you the problem is upstream of you, and it's fixable. It's been fixed, quietly, in plain sight, for a very long time.